Welcome back to Dimebag Darren World Headquarters on the Omnivox channel, where we are reading the old favorite book, Isaac Asimov's Foundation. We're on to Chapter 5. I know you've been waiting, so I appreciate you. Chapter 5. This was the second meeting of the board Hardin had attended, if one were to exclude the informal talks the board members had had with the now-departed Lord Dorwin. Yet the mayor had a perfectly definite idea that at least one other, and possibly two or three, had been held, to which he had somehow never received an invitation. Nor, it seemed to him, he would have received notification of this one, had it not been for the ultimatum. At least it amounted to an ultimatum, though a superficial reading of the visiographed document would lead one to suppose it was a friendly interchange of greetings between two potentates. Hardin fingered it gingerly. It started off floridly with a salutation from His Puissant Majesty, King of Anacreon, to his friend and brother, Dr. Louis Perrin, Chairman of the Board of Trustees of Encyclopedia Foundation No. 1, and it ended even more lavishly with a gigantic multicolored seal of the most involved symbolism. But it was an ultimatum just the same. Hardin said, "It turned out we didn't have much time after all, only 3 months, but little as it was, we threw it away unused. The thing here gives us a week. What do we do now?" Perrin frowned worriedly. "There must be a loophole. It is absolutely unbelievable that they would just push matters to extremes in the face of what Lord Dorwin had assured us regarding the attitude of the Emperor and of the Empire." Hardin perked up. "I see. You've informed the King of Anacreon of this alleged attitude?" "I did, after having placed the proposal to the board for a vote and having received unanimous consent." "And when did this take place?" Perrin climbed onto his dignity. "I do not believe I'm answerable to you in any way, Mayor Hardin." "All right, I'm not that virtually interested. It's my opinion that your diplomatic transmission of Lord Dorwin's valuable contribution to the situation," he lifted the corner of his mouth in a sour half-smile, "that was the direct cause of this friendly little note. They might have delayed longer otherwise, though I don't think so. I don't think the additional time would have helped Terminus any, considering the attitude of the board." Yate Fulham said, "How do you arrive at this remarkable conclusion, Mr. Mayor?" "In a rather simple way. It merely required the use of that much neglected commodity, common sense. You see, there's a branch of human knowledge known as symbolic logic, which can be used to prune away all sorts of clogging deadwood that clutters up human language." "What about it?" said Fulham. "I applied it. Among other things, I applied it to this document here. I didn't really need to for myself because I knew what it was all about, but I think I can explain it more easily to 5 physical scientists by symbols rather than words." Hardin removed a few sheets of paper from the pad under his arm and spread them out. "I didn't do this myself, by the way. Mueller-Hulk of the Division of Logic has his name signed to the analyses, as you can see." Perrin leaned across the table to get a better view, and Hardin continued. "The message from Anacreon was a simple problem, naturally, for the men who wrote it were men of action rather than men of words. It boils down easily and straightforwardly to the unqualified statement when in symbols, and is what you can see, and when in words roughly translated is, you give us what we want in a week, or we beat the hell out of you and take it anyway." There was silence as the 5 members of the board ran down the line of symbols, and Perrin sat down and coughed uneasily. Hardin said, "No loophole, is there, Dr. Perrin?" "Doesn't seem to be." "All right." Hardin replaced the sheets. "Before you now, you see a copy of the treaty between the Empire and Anacreon, a treaty, incidentally, which is signed on the Emperor's behalf by the same Lord Dorwin who was here last week, and with it a symbolic analysis." The treaty ran through 5 pages of fine print, and the analysis was scrawled out in just under half a page. "As you see, gentlemen, something like 90% of the treaty boiled right out of the analysis as being meaningless, and what we have ended up with can only be described in the following interesting manner. Obligations of Anacreon to the Empire? None. Powers of the Empire over Anacreon? None." Again, the 5 followed the reasoning, anxiously checking carefully back to the treaty, and when they were finished, Perrin said in a worried fashion, "That seems to be correct." "You admit, then the treaty is nothing but a declaration of total independence on the part of Anacreon, and a recognition of that status by the Empire?" "It seems so." "And do you suppose that Anacreon doesn't realize that, and is not anxious to emphasize the position of independence, so that it would naturally tend to resent any appearance of threats from the Empire, particularly when it is evident that the Empire is powerless to fulfill any such threats, or would never have allowed independence. But then, interposed Sut, how would Mayor Hardin account for Lord Dorwin's assurances of Empire support? They seemed satisfactory. Hardin threw himself back in the chair. You know, that's the most interesting part of the whole business, I'll admit. I had thought his lordship a most consummate donkey when I first met him, but it turned out that he was actually an accomplished diplomat and a most clever man. I took the liberty of recording all his statements. There was a flurry, and Perrin opened his mouth in horror. What of it? Demanded Hardin. I realized it was a gross breach of hospitality and a thing so-called gentlemen wouldn't do, and also if his lordship had caught on, that would have been most unpleasant, but he didn't, and I have the record, and that's that. I took the record, copied it out, and sent it to Hulk for analysis also. London Crast said, Where is the analysis? That, Hardin replied, is the interesting thing. The analysis was most difficult of the three by all odds, when Hulk, after 2 days of steady work, succeeded in eliminating meaningless statements, vague gibberish, useless qualifications, in short, all the goo and dribble. He found he had nothing left. Everything cancelled out. Lord Dorwin, in the 5 days of discussion, didn't say one damn thing, and said it so you never noticed. There are the assurances you have from your precious Empire. Hardin might have placed an actively working stench bomb on the table and created no more confusion than existed after that last statement. He waited with weary patience for it to die down. So, when you sent threats, and that's what they were, concerning Empire action to Anacreon, you merely irritated a monarch who knew better. Naturally, his ego would demand immediate action, and the ultimatum is the result, which brings me to my original statement. We have 1 week left. What do we do now? It seems, said Sut, that we have no choice but to allow Anacreon to establish military bases on Terminus. I agree with you there, replied Hardin. But what do we do toward kicking them off again at the first opportunity? Yade Fulham's mustache twitched. That sounds like you've made up your mind that violence must be used against them. Violence, came the retort, is the last refuge of the incompetent. But I certainly don't intend to lay down the welcome mat and brush off the best furniture for their use. I still don't like the way you put that, insisted Fulham. It's a dangerous attitude. The more dangerous because we have noticed lately that a sizable section of the populace seems to respond to all your suggestions just so. I might as well tell you, Mayor Hardin, that the board is not quite blind to your recent activities. He paused and there was a general agreement. Hardin shrugged. Fulham went on. If you were to inflame the city into an act of violence, you would achieve elaborate suicide, and we don't intend to allow that. Our policy has but one cardinal principle, and that is the Encyclopedia. Then, said Hardin, you come to the conclusion that we must continue our intensive campaign of doing nothing. Perrin said bitterly, you yourself have demonstrated that the Empire cannot help us, and though how and why it can be so, I don't understand. If compromise is necessary, Hardin had that nightmarish sensation of running at top speed and getting nowhere. There is no compromise. Don't you realize that this bosh about military bases is a particularly inferior grade of drivel? Hot Roderick told us what the Anacreons are after. Outright annexation and imposition of its own feudal system of landed estates and peasant aristocracy economy upon us. What is left is our bluff of atomic power, and may force them to move slowly, but they will move nonetheless. He had risen indignantly, and the rest rose with him, except for George Farah. And then George Farah spoke. Everyone will please sit down. We've gone quite far enough, I think. Come, there's no use in looking so furious, Mayor Hardin. None of us have been committing treason. You'll have to convince me of that. Farah smiled gently. You know you don't mean that. Let me speak. His little shrewd eyes were half closed, and the perspiration gleamed on the smooth expanse of his chin. There seemed no point in concealing that the board had come to the decision that the real solution to the anacreonic problem lies in what was to be revealed when the vault opens in 6 days from now. Is that your contribution to the matter? Yes. We are to do nothing, is that right? Except for to walk in quiet serenity, in utter faith, for the deus ex machina to pop out of the vault? Stripped of your emotional phraseology, that's the idea. Such unsubtle escapism, really, Dr. Farah. Such folly smacks of genius. A lesser mind would be incapable of it. Farah smiled indulgently. Your taste in epigrams is amusing, Hardin, but out of place. As a matter of fact, I think you remember my line of argument concerning the vault about 3 weeks ago. Yes, I remember it. I don't deny that it was anything but a stupid idea from the standpoint of deductive logic alone. You said, stop me when I make a mistake, that Harry Seldon was the greatest psychologist in the system, that he could foresee the tight and uncomfortable spot we're in now, that he established the vault as a method of telling us the way out. You got the essence of the idea. Would it surprise you to hear that I've given considerable thought to the matter these 3 weeks? Very flattering. With what result? With the result that pure deduction is found wanting. Again, what is needed is a little sprinkling of common sense. For instance, if he foresaw the Acreonian mess, why not have placed us on some other planet nearer the galactic center? It's well known that Seldon maneuvered the commissioners on Trantor into ordering the Foundation established on Terminus. But why should he have done so? Why put us out here at all, if he could see in advance the break in communication lines and our isolation from the galaxy, the threat of our neighbors, and of our helplessness because of the lack of metals on Terminus? That above all. Or if he foresaw all this, why not have warned the original settlers in advance that they might have had time to prepare, rather than wait, as he is doing until 1 foot is over the cliff, even before doing so? And don't forget this, even though he could foresee the problem then, we can see it equally well now. Therefore, if he could foresee the solution then, we should be able to see it now. After all, Seldon was not a magician. There are no trick methods of escaping from a dilemma that he can see and we can't. But, Hardin, we can't. But you haven't tried. You haven't tried once. First, you refused to admit there was a menace at all. Then you reposed an absolutely blind faith in the Emperor. Now you've shifted it to Harry Seldon. Throughout, you've invariably relied on an authority on or past, never on yourselves. His fist balled spasmodically. It amounts to a diseased attitude, a conditioned reflex that shunts aside the independence of your minds whenever there's a question of opposing authority. There seems no doubt ever in your minds that the Emperor is more powerful than you are, or Harry Seldon wiser. And that's wrong, don't you see? For some reason, no one cared to answer him. Hardin continued, It isn't just you, it's a whole galaxy. Perrin heard Lord Dorwin's idea of scientific research. Dorwin thought the way to be a good archaeologist was to just read all the books on the subject, written by men who are dead for centuries. He thought that the way to solve archaeological puzzles was to weigh the opposing authorities. And Perrin listened and made no objections. Don't you see that there's something wrong with that? Again, the note of near pleading in his voice. Again, no answer. He went on, And you men, and half of Terminus as well, are just as bad. We are here considering the encyclopedia the all-in-all. We consider the greatest end of science is the classification of past data. It's important, but there's no further work to be done? We're receding and forgetting. Don't you see? Here in the periphery, they've lost atomic power. In Gamma Andromeda, a power plant has blown up because of poor repair, and the Chancellor of the Empire complains that the atomic technicians are scarce. And the solution? To train new ones? Never. Instead, they're going to restrict atomic power. And for the third time, don't you see it's galaxy-wide? It's a worship of the past. It's a deterioration, a stagnation. He stared from one to the other, and they gazed fixedly at him. Farah was the first to recover. Well, mystical philosophy isn't going to help us here. Let us be concrete. Do you deny that Harry Seldon could easily have worked out historical trends of the future by simple psychological technique? No, of course not, cried Hardin. But we can't rely on him for a solution. At least he might indicate the problem, but if there's ever going to be a solution, we must work on it ourselves. He can't do that for us. Fulham spoke suddenly. What do you mean, indicate the problem? We know the problem. Hardin whirled on him. You think you do. You think Anacreon is all Harry Seldon is likely to be worried about? I disagree. I tell you, gentlemen, that as yet none of you has the faintest conception of what's really going on. And you do? I think so. Hardin jumped up and pushed his chair away. His eyes were cold and hard. If there's one thing that's definite, it's that there's something smelly about the whole situation, something that is bigger than anything we've talked about yet. Just ask yourself this question. Why was it that among the original population of the Foundation, not one first-class psychologist was included, except for Bor Alarin? And he carefully refrained from training his pupils in more than the fundamentals. A short silence, and Farah said, All right, why? Perhaps because a psychologist might have caught on to what this was all about, and too soon to suit Harry Seldon. As it is, we've been stumbling around, getting misty glimpses of the truth and no more, and that is what Harry Seldon wanted. He laughed harshly. Good day, gentlemen, and stalked out of the room. And thus ends Chapter 5. Sorry for the long wait. Hopefully Chapter 6 won't take me as long to do. And thank you very much for listening. Bye for now.